in a humiliating about turn, the Justice Minister Andrew Little has dropped plans to repeal the three strikes law after New Zealand First refused to give its support. Mr Little had been expected to bring the matter before Cabinet this morning, but instead called a media conference to say it was all off. Here's our political reporter Craig McCulloch.
Andrew Little has long wanted to see the back of the three strikes law. It was one of the first pledges he made after becoming Justice Minister. And last month he signalled it would happen soon. This morning, a sudden back down.
New Zealand First have said they are not prepared to support the repeal of three strikes at this point. They didn't want that to be seen as separate from a broader program of criminal justice reform.
So what happened? Did New Zealand First change its mind? Did Winston Peters renege on a deal? Or did Mr Little jump the gun before nailing down New Zealand First's support?
I stand by my judgments. Before you get a paper to Cabinet, you go through a variety of hoops, and we had gone through all those hoops.
Mr Peters is keeping his own counsel, turning down RNZ's interview request. The party's caucus meets tomorrow, after which it's understood the MPs will formally announce they'll oppose any repeal of the three strikes law. But Mr Little says the disagreement doesn't show the coalition is dysfunctional.
Look, this is coalition government. The parties have their ways of operating. In the end, what's important is that you maintain the confidence of the parties. But the New Zealand First is very clear to me they are totally committed to criminal justice reform.
This is clumsy, incompetent government that just doesn't know what it's doing.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges says it's an embarrassing and amateur botch-up.
And, if you can't trust the government to get this sort of basic stuff on law and order, on industry right, how can you trust them to run the country?
Winston Peters, of course, is due to take over as Prime Minister pretty much any time now, when Jacinda Ardern goes to hospital to give birth. At her weekly press conference, the Prime Minister was in damage control mode, keen to play down the significance of the day's events.
All of these things are a matter of discussion for each of us as members of the government. As I say, three strikes makes up only a very small part of a much wider agenda, and we're continuing to pursue that agenda as a government.
The day began with an open letter in the newspapers, victims of violent crimes calling for the government to relent, not to push ahead with the repeal. One of them was Norm Withers, whose elderly mother was viciously beaten roughly 2 decades ago. He started a law and order petition that gained so many signatures it forced a referendum in 1999.
Quite frankly, I believe Winston and the team have applied common sense. They've always had a pretty strong view on law and order going back, and I thought, well, if these guys turn around and support Mr Little, I would be deeply disappointed.
On the flip side, Liam Martin from Victoria University is upset Labour backed down, and the criminology lecturer is worried about what it may portend for the wider reform.
Three strikes is failed American prison policy, man. It's a law named with a baseball slogan that doesn't even really make sense in New Zealand. So I just hope New Zealand First won't derail the whole reform agenda in criminal justice. It has me worried about that.
A wider criminal justice reform package is to be presented at a summit in August, and expect another big announcement in this area this week. The government will reveal its plans for Waikeria Prison on Wednesday. But for now, it's hard not to see the three strikes back down as anything but deeply embarrassing for Andrew Little and the Prime Minister. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.